Bündnis Marxismus und Tierbefreiung, der Podcast.
Welcome to another episode of our podcast. Today we are talking to Neda Hussein from Baladi Palestine Animal Rescue Team. Baladi was founded in 2020 by animal rights activists. They mainly work with animals on the street. They rescue and care for them and find them new homes. We have already interviewed Neda's colleague Ahlam for the 4th edition of our online magazine Hammel und Sittich. You can find the interview on our website and on our channels. There you can also find information on how to support Baladi's work.
Okay, so welcome everybody to a new episode of our podcast. And today the issue is animal rights work and the situation in Palestine. And with us today is Neda Hussein, who is from Palestine, and she's going to talk about us as a member of Baladi Animal Rescue Team. And you might have already read the interview that we conducted with another member of Baladi on our homepage. We published it some months ago. And now we can use the podcast to, on the one side, introduce Baladi again, but also have a brief update on what's happening in Palestine and how the situation of the animals has developed ever since. Hi, Neda, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Sure. So it's pretty obvious that the situation in Palestine regarding the current war against Palestine is very bad. So speaking today is the 21st of February and the war is still going on. Just as a general introduction and first question, how have you experienced the last months and the last weeks?
Yeah, so the last few months and weeks have been very stressful. It feels as though the country is in a state of mourning, even though all eyes are on Gaza, rightfully so. In the West Bank, there is still extreme suffering, lots of military incursions. We still see lots of deaths of people of all ages, invasions into hospitals. We still see the same violations, not on the large scale as we see in Gaza, but we have been experiencing this in the West Bank. Roads have been closed. Checkpoints are a lot more difficult to pass through. So our day-to-day has been affected in the past few months.
And apart from media coverage, do you get any information out of Gaza and how do you get it?
So I only get media coverage there, but there is social media, which is alternative media. You'll see more firsthand accounts instead of reports from news agencies. So that's how I'll get it. I'll get the news from social media or sharing posts, and then also from news agencies.
And you also just mentioned it, that Gaza is the center of attention. So, of course, most of the fighting is happening there and most of the war is conducted against Gaza. But there are also attacks in the West Bank by right-wing settlers and Zionist settlers. What's happening there? How's the situation like?
So the overall situation is that it's very difficult to travel. Freedom of movement is heavily restricted more than before. You're talking about maybe to expect a 3 to 4 hour commute for a distance of maybe 15 kilometers. This is what Palestinians have been experiencing. It can be for reasons such as the army doesn't want to work and they have that power to control at our exits, or it could be that they want to let settlers pass through. In terms of settler violence, there are roads in which is very dangerous. There's only specific times in which people who have Palestinian license plates or people who are visibly presenting as Palestinian or Muslim feel comfortable going out. For example, as animal rescuers, we have a dog sanctuary that we have not been able to visit for the past several months. And we used to take these visits once a week. So you're talking about just complete routine of our lives has been appended.
So you just mentioned the animals. Could you go a bit more into detail? How is the situation of the animals like under these conditions, and how is it affected in general?
Yeah, so vet care has always been hard to access because of the movement restrictions, and now it's more than ever. There can be times when we have a sick cat and we need to make do with taking care of the animals ourselves with our own knowledge, and because it could be several days until we can access a vet. Usually there were times when we would be able to drive from city to city and make it work, and it's still very difficult. We've had animals die either immediately upon reaching a veterinarian or even on the way to the veterinarian. And now these instances are happening more frequently.
Well, this is a description that, I mean, it seems to be very, very difficult, really, to develop politics that are pro-animal in this current very specific situation. But as I imagine, also left-wing policies in general. So both regarding animal policies and left-wing policies in general, what is your take on that? How do you expect political developments to be going on in Gaza and also in the West Bank? Do you see any opportunities for left-wing politics and for animal politics to actually be carried on?
Yeah, so I think this is really interesting to kind of think through, because there are left-wing policies, some that are not heard of here, that might exist in other countries, but then there are some where under these circumstances left-wing policies have left-wing beliefs, I would say, such as queer liberation or animal liberation. We see them happening. There were queer presenting people who are aid workers who said that they were able to enter Gaza and they were welcomed by the people, and they were able to accept and exchange goods and exchange nice words. And, propaganda will tell a queer person that, oh, once you enter Gaza, you will be like hung from a building, or you will be, I don't know. There is just like this evil fantasy of what they will do to you. And there's also the idea of community care, and mutual aid, which is kind of inherent in Palestinian culture, and maybe in Western countries this is considered left wing. So you will see people sharing their food more, that you will see, because you will hear people coming out of Gaza saying, like, I don't know if I will survive tomorrow. I do not need to hoard what I have. Everybody will take a share of what is there. So this kind of answers the question in two parts. In terms of animal rights, you've seen people go back and forth, risk their own lives between battlefields to go either check on a companion animal or be able to rescue them, because during the moment of fleeing, they weren't able to either carry the animal because they were carrying either their children or their loved ones. So you've definitely seen moments of this.
So as far as I understand you, you would say that there are a lot of constraints to what organized left-wing politics could do, but there's a lot of day-to-day solidarity going on among the people.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's maybe go back to this later. Just one more question regarding the current Israeli aggression. So there have been international efforts to stop it. For example, on most prominent in front of the International Court of Justice by South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Do you consider this sort of going on trying to stop the war has any perspective, or is that the way it can be stopped?
I think it was a beautiful symbolic gesture of solidarity, but that's its limitation. It was just symbolic, and it was just a gesture. Nothing has been enforced tangibly on the ground, and there's even feelings of retaliation that because of this negative attention or this highlight on Israel, that it would cause them to kill more, or to just to restrict Palestinian life and deprive Palestinians even more than they have already been doing. So there's definitely these limitations of Western institutions. We're seeing it now, that, with World War II and the creation of these institutions, almost at the same time as the creation of the state, and the time that we need, we use these institutions, we use the UN, and we use the ICJ. There is nothing that can actually be enforced.
So Neda, I think we could talk a lot more about the current situation, about occupation and everything, but one of the reasons we are so happy to have you here today is because of your animal rights work in Palestine, and it would maybe be good to go on to that, to talk with you about your work, the work you're doing there.
Okay, so with Vegan in Palestine and with Baladi Animal Rescue Team, they both work together. We rescue cats and dogs, and sometimes birds, so animals that are wild animals here. And we rescue them with a vegan philosophy, in the sense that the animal will receive as much care as we can. The animal will receive as much care as we can provide. Like, we are not in a rush to either speed up the care or to adopt them out. That way we have less pressure on us. We're always caring for the animals. We've had animals who are in our care for maybe 4 to 5 years at this point. And if we know that nobody else can take care of them to their best capacity, either because they are blind or because they have certain disabilities, or they were rescued as a pact of animals and it would be unfair to separate them, we keep this responsibility for us. So in addition to caring, feeding, and transporting these animals, we also do vegan activism in Palestine. Vegan activism is fairly new due to post-Oslo Accords. You've had maybe a 180-degree turn of the Palestinian diet. It was Palestinians were mostly farmers. They ate from the land, and the traditional Palestinian diet is very plant-based. There was a change post-Nakba, post-catastrophe, when a lot of Palestinians were uprooted from their land. And instead of eating seasonal foods, they were eating what the United Nations Relief Work or World Food Program was providing. It was a lot of canned meats or dehydrated milk, and the Palestinian diet had a complete change. And then post-Oslo, you saw the introduction of American fast food chains, such as the fried chicken, such as the burger places, and it's becoming more and more difficult to come across the traditional Palestinian foods within the cities. So even within just 1 or 2 generations, the Palestinian restaurant and food culture has completely changed and is continuing to do so. So we have done a lot of educational events, kind of discussing the political connection with the way we currently eat, the political situation, and our historical Nakba with how we currently eat. And also, we have been able to even veganize some of the Palestinian street foods that are animal-based, for even people who still like that, who is still part of their culture and they grew up eating. That being vegan does not restrict, or it does not make you miss out on anything. So we did a lot of community events. Recently, we have been able to do a vegan food food parcel distribution. We are running it for people who have been affected either by the war or who are just generally cannot afford to eat. So in this current time, it's people who have been displaced from the war. It's people in the West Bank who have lost employment. There are thousands of Palestinian laborers who prior to the war would go out into Israel and work manual labor jobs, and these people have been unemployed because Israel revoked the permits of these Palestinian workers. So you're talking about 5 months now. Families in the West Bank, a large portion of them have had no income. So we have been able to distribute food parcels of, traditional Palestinian staples such as tahiniya, lentils, spices, nuts, and everything in between. I think that's it. That's the capacity of our work, yeah.
Do you want to say a bit more how you yourself became an animal rights activist, or maybe you and also others as well?
Yeah, so I'll say I've been vegan for maybe 7 to 8 years now. I don't remember like the exact day I became vegan, but I had an intention that I was going to be vegan eventually. But everybody has these vegan moments, and for me, they were just rapidly happening more and more. But I remember my first vegan moment was playing with the bugs in the backyard or the garden, and I caught the bugs and I went to show my grandfather, and I'm like so happy. I'm this little girl showing the bugs to my grandfather, and I'm like, look, grandfather, I have bugs, and he thinks that I'm so scared but I was happy. So he starts to kill them, and I start to cry, and I go back to the other bugs, and I I'm making them feel better. I'm trying to talk to them, tell them that, it's okay, I'm sorry. And I just felt so sad because for that moment, I saw the bug as a human. I imagine, what if my friend or my sister just left and didn't come back? So I started to have more and more of these emotional connection moments to animals. And I'll say what solidified my commitment to veganism is, outside of my emotional connection, was reading vegan political theory, specifically vegan feminist theory, such as Carol Adams. She was somebody who instead of who kind of directed my veganism as a place of boycott, as a place of principle, instead of an emotional reaction. And I think both are very valid, but that was my, I think, pivotal turning point in what made me an activist, because I was able to see how the violence on animals connects to the violence that happens to us, that happens amongst us. So that's probably what led me to be a vegan activist. And then the moments just keep happening. The more I meet other people or I meet other animals.
Yeah, thank you for this answer. I found it very interesting that you now connect, also in your answer before, you connect the suffering of humans with the suffering of animals. And I think one thing that is said very often, unfortunately, is that people ask, why do people in Palestine anyway care about animals and veganism? There are way bigger problems, the occupation, and especially at the moment, the war. What would you reply to them?
Yeah, so I'll say, from listening to other theorists, is that this is definitely a speciesist approach, because I see or I hear African American vegan activists who will compare the meat and dairy industry to slavery. You will have Jewish vegan activists call it a Holocaust. So the idea of seeing walls and cages and Palestinians in walls and cages, being treated like animals. You see currently with more videos of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force or Israeli Occupation Force, IOF, the way they torture or humiliate either prisoners or civilians. They will tell them to act like dogs. They will tell them to bark or meow or eat from a bowl in order to degrade them, as though there is something inherently degrading about being an animal. We have seen videos of sheep in Gaza being sniped, just sheep walking without any human companion. We see people currently in the north of Gaza who are being starved, surviving on animal feed. They are picking out the worms and the bugs from either rabbit or bird feed and trying to make bread just so they do not pass out from starvation, which children and people are passing out and dying of starvation in the north of Gaza. So I will say that what the animals are going through, the people are also going through, if not much worse. Additionally, you do hear this saying, maybe like not right, maybe not at this moment, but you will say like maybe the West or the Americans care more about their dogs than they care about a Palestinian. And I will say that's because animals are a class, right? Like if cats and dogs in the West might be respected more than Palestinians, but the cows and the chickens and the pigs certainly are not respected. So the cats and dogs in the US, maybe they, and I will say no, right? Because there are kill shelters, because there is lots of animal cruelty. But then there's also these same cats and dogs, these same breeds that live under bombing or live in between checkpoints and live here in Palestine. So yeah, that's my answer.
So would you say, I mean, just to understand that right, would you say that the situation the people are living in is at least a part of the answer to the question why or in which ways people in both Gaza and the West Bank treat animals and think of animals?
Mm-hmm. So due to the rapid industrialization of Palestinians' city life, there has been many different shifts of the way we treat animals. And I cannot answer for Gaza because I do not have direct context there and I've never been. But what I see in the West Bank is in the villages, people have historically cared for animals. People still continue to do so. I remember growing up, it was just very common for all our food will go to the stray cats that are living in the backyard. We always left buckets of water for them. It was part of my grandfather's daily routine. Like he would wake up, get dressed, and on his way to prayer, he would fill up the buckets around the house for the cats and dogs that came. But with the industrialization of Palestinian cities and people living in more private, I would say like, I don't know the correct terminology, but more like privatized housing and blocks, people are more unwelcoming to animals. There is lots of cruelty, both on a personal level and also on a municipality level. Last year, there was a Palestinian mayor who put a 20 shekel bounty on dogs. So anybody who kills a dog and gives it to him gets 20 shekels, which is the equivalent of 5 euros. And of course, this created madness in the society, and it was rejected overall by the society, but it was still municipality public policy. Right now, it's still municipality policy, but in order to avoid the bad reputation and the backlash, cats and dogs are still being poisoned and shot as a means of population control. And this is, again, very recently due to the fast urbanization. However, also due to the global trends of people having dogs, you will see like upper class families having dogs in certain neighborhoods. And these dogs are never the local breeds. They are breeds that have been imported. They are German Shepherds, they are Huskies, they are dogs that represent a certain class that you were able to pay maybe $1,000 for a dog. And it's not the dog that we grew up seeing, the dogs that are eating from the garbages, the dogs that wander our neighborhoods. It's kind of like a segregation of dogs, the ones that belong on the leashes and in the fancy houses, and the ones that live amongst us.
So you just mentioned industrialization, and regarding the exploitation and killing of animals, what we are dealing with here in Germany, but also in Western Europe and everywhere else, is of course the meat industry as the main thing to deal with.
Yeah.
Is something like the meat industry actually a thing in Palestine, and how developed is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So people who grew up in Palestine will tell you that they used to see people who like sheep herders walking through the streets, and now seeing a herd of sheep is a very rare sight. We want to take out our phones and take a video of it, but maybe before 15 years ago, it was animals lived outside, like farmed animals or livestock. They lived outside. They ate grass. They were not caged. Chickens lived in backyards. But due to the industrialization, we are seeing less and less of these livestock, and that's because they are in these enclosed facilities. They are temperature controlled. They have little to no human interaction, right? Like the food is kind of placed in front of them and refilled by machines. There was a situation maybe 3 years ago in which there was a technical error, and this technical error, I assume, had to do with temperature, that led to a facility of maybe 1,000 chickens, very tightly packed, chickens that never saw the sunlight, chickens that never were able to maybe walk a few steps due to how tight the place was, and they all died. They all died in that facility. So we're seeing a lot less backyard animals and farming that was done in older ways, and we're seeing the newer ways. And you're talking, in my grandmother's generation, meat was maybe eaten once or twice a year. And when we have a holiday, or Muslims in Palestine have a holiday, which is the sacrifice, in which they sacrifice an animal. So it's Eid al-Adha, which is like the celebration of sacrifice. It was called the meat celebration because that was one of the only times Palestinian families ate meat. And now, even traditionally vegan foods that were created or that came to be during Christian fasting, so which is equivalent of vegan food, are such as hummus, or such as hummus, such as tomato pots, are now having meat added to it just because it's just become the norm.
So against the background of what you just described as the meat industry in Palestine, can you tell us a little bit about why Baladi chooses the focus of working mainly with the animals living in the streets and not, for instance, working against factory farming and this specific mode of industrial capital exploitation of animals in these big farms?
Yeah, so one, it's just these are the animals that we interact with on a daily basis. It's a lot of the rescues kind of happen because I am walking, or like a rescuer is walking, and they see a cat that has been, I don't know, hit by a car, or a dog that is limping, or kittens that have been separated from their mother. So these rescues happen more naturally because they are the ones that we are in day-to-day contact with. And we see it strategically as well. We are not, it's not a sense of prioritizing cats and dogs, but over cows or sheep or chickens, but just this is our capacity. And also because, like I mentioned before, it is norm and practice to shoot and poison dogs, whereas in other countries, vegan activists can focus solely on farmed animals because it's consensus that yes, a dog should not be poisoned. A dog lives in the house with the family and the children, and the cat is sitting on a lady's lap. Like these are kind of images you see of pets with families in the Western world. We do not have that. We do not have that binary in which there are animals that deserve to live and animals that don't. Whereas all animals are suffering in Palestinian society. So I think it's a way, if we can establish that cats and dogs are sentient beings, it will unleash, or it will help us work towards educating that cows and sheep and chickens are also sentient beings and deserve to live. And many people have had that connection, people who adopt a cat or a dog and they start to think, wait, how am I eating this burger? And my cat is right next to me. So that's our hope. But if we have the opportunity and the facilities, of course, I would go for it, rescuing any of the farmed animals.
So how do people react to your work? Are you successful in showing that there has been this connection between humans and animals before, at least in Palestine, but also anywhere else?
Yeah, so people react for sure, and I'll mention maybe two instances that I feel really put Baladi on the map in Palestinian society, and I'll say the most recent one was when the mayor had put a 20 shekel bounty. He literally said, anybody who brings me a dead dog, they will get 20 shekels. And Baladi had posted, and there was a lot of people fighting back and arguing against what he said, but Baladi had said, we will give 50 shekels for anybody who takes care of a dog. And we didn't have the money, but we were just like, we will post this, and if it happens, we'll figure it out. And nobody asked for money, but it was just the symbolic attention that we got. People are like, yes, this is a solution. It's very lazy for a mayor to just, one, export the problem to civilians, and two, why are we resorting to killing as a solution, right? As Palestinians, or as any person who knows, who's been in a history class, right? They know that killing anything for anybody never solved anything. It never brought about systemic change. So that was one situation that brought really positive change, and it was just because of the backlash and because of the news even reaching Western media and just regional media. A lot of municipalities that had this policy of killing just retracted because they didn't want the negative attention on them. And there was a time, I think the year was 2021, when we had posted before the sacrifice of Eid that Eid is not about murder, it's about sacrifice. And Muslims tend to be very confident in their religion, and they will say, what are you talking about? How can you how can you call something so sacred as a murder? This is called a sacrifice. There's a distinction. And as animal activists, we know that the animal that's being killed does not care why it's being killed, right? There are videos of, on Eid that break my heart, of running away from people because they know they can sense, or they see the knives, or they've seen their companions or other animals get killed. So we posted that, and a lot of people ridiculed us. Some people threatened us for kind of disgracing religion or defacing religion. But there were also lots of discussions on how relevant is sacrifice in 2021. How, if sacrifice came to be as a way to feed the poor, there are many ways that we can help the poor without killing an animal. So it brought out these discussions, right? If there is a poor person and you want to help them, maybe a bag of meat isn't the most it isn't the most helpful thing, right? You could pay their rent or you could pay their tuition. And even in the post, we had listed alternatives. We posted alternatives to murder. So we wrote, pay someone's tuition or pay somebody's rent, or feed them plant-based meals. It lasts longer. It's cheaper, right? Like the amount of meat, for the price of meat, you could give them so many more bags of rice and lentils, and it's just exponentially more practical. And and directly after this, there was a parliamentarian in Jordan, right, the neighboring country of Palestine, who spoke about creating laws about how sacrifice needs to be enforced, right? It can't just be any family picks up a sheep and just kills it, right? There needs to be more regulated methods. And of course, there are so many limitations of that from a vegan perspective, but it did make or present the case that sheep are sentient beings, and the fact that they need to be treated better, which is what her argument is. It did make the animals come off more deserving of dignity and respect by like a top leader.
So I think this is super interesting what you just said about what would be a good way to help people in need, and that giving them meat is not obviously the best thing to do. And this reminded me of something that comrades in Brazil have developed, the notion of veganismo popular, which would mean something like veganism of the working class, veganism of the people, in contrast to a consumerist and hipster-orientated veganism that is pretty dominant in Western countries right now. And as you just were talking about what to do rightly connected to the needs of people, would you think that this is something that would be worth discussing in the Palestinian context?
Yeah, so with veganismo popular, and you have the two spectrums, right? You'll see people who are doing veganism as a cleanse or a trend, and usually these people are uncommitted to veganism. It's more for selfish reasons. And then you have people who are more, and you'll see them on the left side of the spectrum in every way. They're usually like, they are activists, they are feminist activists, they are environmental activists as well. Currently, the movement is not that big in Palestine, but because the Palestinian diet is traditionally plant-based. But for example, you'll see news articles like in American magazines about a superfood, about this new vegan superfood that's high in protein, and it's a grain which helps your body absorb. And it's just this grain, it's called frike, that Palestinians just eat all the time, and it's very affordable, and it's just, how is superfood? Like, is it a superfood? We didn't know that. So we don't need to like market veganism that way, but it's just I would say it's more about teaching this generation about like my generation, maybe the generation a little bit before me, and of course the ones after me, about what Palestinian cuisine and culture have been about. I know when I talk to my grandmother, for example, there are even so many leaves and greens and plants that she's eaten that are maybe on the verge of extinction in Palestine, plants that have actually been made illegal to forage by the Israeli military, by the Israeli government. So yeah, that's how I would talk about it. There is a little bit of what you were talking about, or maybe alluding to, such as people who are into veganism for more selfish reasons. But these are a few individuals with, and on a personal level, we can kind of identify like who's here because this is cool and who's here because they are down. But the movement is not that big for us to have so many factions yet.
So what I think is interesting is that you connect your agenda, if you want to call it like this, of veganism with the change of society as a whole. And so in what ways do you think, on the one side, can veganism change Palestinian society, or maybe has already changed in the ways you perceive it? And on the other hand, where do you see limitations? So what is something that cannot be changed by veganism in the Palestinian society?
Even regarding the situation of animals, maybe.
Yeah, so I'll say that religion can be a limitation in embracing veganism 100%. I think there needs to be reform on religion because I know people who are plant-based 364 days of the year, and on Eid al-Adha they will they believe that sacrifice, that murdering an animal is sacrifice and is mandated. So I definitely see that limitation. I see limitations now in the way we want to speak about animals, that people in Gaza are being murdered in the most brutal ways in human history. There are weapons being tested on them. You've seen people collect children and parents and neighbors in their backpacks and body parts and not know what to do with it. So I think there's definitely a limitation when we as a society say that if I want to come and say that these animals deserve dignity, if I am not also fighting for the dignity and rights of my own people, if I'm focusing solely on the animals, then that will be hypocritical. That will be ill-received and also completely hypocritical. I see that definitely in terms of our activism after this all ends.
Of course, coming back to animal rights work and also the question of veganism, of course, also this is happening under the context of military occupation and the occupation of Palestine. So how would you say, or what do you experience, how is the military occupation of Palestine shaping the animal rights work, and what limitations and what problems do you face that come from the occupation?
Easily the fact that and this is just one recent experience on the top of my head in which somebody had called me and said there is a cat that has been hit by a car, and they bring the cat over to me, and there is a vet that maybe 2 kilometers away, but there is a wall. There's a separation wall, apartheid wall. And because of that wall and because of the checkpoints and the limited directions that Palestinians can take, these Palestinian roads get congested very, very fast. And the cat died in my car on the way to the vet. So there's certainly this. There's also just the fact that there can be diseases or infestations that occur in Israeli society amongst animals or in Palestinian society, and because of the occupation, because in high conflict moments there are no coordinations between vets or anything. So we see infestations of diseases such as rabies that'll like further make people afraid or make people hysterical and have them react in violent ways, or because of these infestations, that the Palestinian Ministry of Health is ill-equipped to handle in a proper way. So these are some ways for sure that our work is affected. And yeah, just transporting animals. There were times we had to transport animals through with like tear gas flying over our cars. It's just it's the way that our lives are affected day to day. And as rescuers, animals, like there is no past because you're an animal or you're a rescuer. It just you are still a Palestinian, and the dog and the cat are still in Palestine, so they will face the same aggressions.
So I can imagine that a lot of people would, regarding this situation, say, well, it's good that you care for the animals, but you should get rid of the occupation first. And if there's military occupation and no free Palestine, why should you care for the animals first? So they would say, before you can do anything regarding animals or some other cause of left-wing politics, first you should get away the occupation and free Palestine. What would your answer look like to these people?
So this is not a new argument, and this argument never comes with good intentions, right? As a feminist, feminists in Palestine or feminists in any other liberation movement will hear the same thing, such as, oh, we need to end, we need Black liberation, or we need Palestinian liberation before women's liberation. Yeah, so this argument is not new. And what happens a lot of times, and I'll say this from a feminist perspective and then apply it to animals, but during the Iraq war, when US officials were saying, we're going in there to save the women, and they said this in Afghanistan as well, what happened was that local feminist movements became extremely unpopular because they became associated with imperialism. And that happens too, and it's the activists and it's the feminist activists and the women, and also the animal activists and the animals that suffer a lot because of their connection to imperialism. When we hear this, there are sometimes stories you'll hear of soldiers rescuing kittens from Gaza, or rescuing or feeding animals at the checkpoints. There's a checkpoint. There's a checkpoint on your way out of Bethlehem, in which the dogs just stay there. They relax under the checkpoint, and the soldiers feed them. And Palestinians are forced to either like wait outside for their inspection. Sometimes they are arrested or killed at these checkpoints, and they say, oh, I wish I was just one of those dogs, or like, I wish I was a dog. So I will say that this argument is not holistic. It's not well-intentioned. It's usually a way to silence activism from people who are not looking for liberation. They're usually looking for a privilege, or they're looking for superiority in any context, right? Like either if they are like a right-wing Palestinian, or if they are like an upper-class Palestinian, these types of arguments will be heard for them. Like, do not talk about any PA corruption. We need to get rid of the occupation. And you realize that they are all hand in hand. They all function together. There is no occupation. Like, occupation is a form of speciesism. Colonialism is a form of speciesism. So is patriarchy, when you have to classify certain people and individuals as others, and which ones deserve or which group of people are okay to be killed. So that's how I would answer them, and which group of people are not. But yeah.
yeah, we mentioned before, like these more lifestyleish vegans that lived formerly in the Western countries, and quite a lot of them, I would say that Israel is kind of like a vegan paradise, and they like to travel there. I mean, maybe not at the moment, but before. But we know as well that there is kind of a vegan washing campaign, we would say, going on in favor of the Israeli government. How do you assess like this campaign or this topic?
Yeah. So one, I think vegan washing is a bizarre concept because any like remotely sensible or intelligent vegan will just reject it. Like, what is a vegan military, right? Militaries are one of the largest polluters of the world. We have many people who have been killed and they leave behind their companion animals. Um, it just it doesn't make sense to me how you can be a war criminal and a vegan at the same time. They seem to like be mutually exclusive to me. Also, just I wish I had the statistics on hand, but just there's a lot of vegan activists, and this is discussed in a book called Vegan Entanglements that I just read. But Israel is one of the largest importers of live animals from live cows or cattle from Australia, in which they are packed on ships and they get stuck on sea for a long time. Animals regularly die. These conditions are brutal for animals. They have they also are one of the largest consumers of chicken, like of a population per capita in the world. So it's just false. And I feel if any country that needs to like so heavily market themselves, somebody like somebody should question why do they need to call themselves a vegan military? Yeah, and let alone of the fact that they also just brand everything, right? Like it's not hummus, it has to be Israeli hummus, and it's not couscous, it's Israeli couscous. But I mean, in a region with all these arbitrarily drawn borders that are people across the Levant have been eating hummus, people across North Africa have been eating couscous. Why does it need to be branded in a specific way? A lot of these foods are culturally appropriated. They're stolen foods on restaurants and stolen restaurants of families that have been forcibly displaced and not allowed to return back to. So to call Israel a vegan haven is just it's a lie, but it's also just such a shallow lie.
And what's also not talked about here is the meat industry in Israel, right? I mean, how can you be vegan washed if you have a meat industry?
Yeah, for sure.
So maybe talking a little bit about this meat industry, where in the context we are doing politics in, the situation is that for the workers that are exploited in the meat industries, that many of these workers are migrant workers that get paid low salaries. Do you have an impression about who's actually working and being exploited in the meat industry in Israel?
Yeah, so I unfortunately don't have any data on that.
But just to add something, we know that in general, people, especially from the West Bank, of course, not out of Gaza because they can't leave, people from the West Bank face more precarious and more insecure jobs in Israel than others because they have restrictions connected to their rights of where to stay and where to work. So I guess this might also happen in the meat industry, but unfortunately, we don't know. But how about the vegan activists in Israel or the vegan lifestyle people? Do they actually buy into this, or is there any sort of resistance from the vegan community towards the vegan washing propaganda?
Um, I think Palestinian solidarity activists are very aware, right, that the Israeli left is almost non-existent, right? Maybe there's like 50 people, I don't know, but there isn't a strong leftist movement for them to have these vegan washing I would say awareness of it. There are Israeli vegans that's for different reasons. There's different theories on why there is a significant Israeli vegan population, but many of them serve in the military. Many of them are able, for some reason, I don't know how, but cognitively they're able to separate that animals cannot be killed, but Palestinians deserve to be killed. Yeah, but I feel that's the norm in the the Israeli vegan society.
So regarding the work of Baladi, I know that you, by principle, don't cooperate with NGOs from Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that the case? What's your motivation?
So one, it's never a nice feeling to work with your oppressor, because you never know what the price of that is. There are Palestinian rescuers who choose to work with Israelis, and there's many stories about that power dynamic and how it's not always fun. Like it can be convenient, but they have paid certain prices for their relationship for that. But for me, it's also about building something authentic, building something that is independent, building something that is Palestinian, and seeing where that goes. And there hasn't been a situation in which we sacrificed an animal's life because we need to take this, we need Israeli money, or we need Israeli medical facilities. We have in order to save this life, we have always done the best we can with the circumstances that we can, the circumstances that we have.
Yeah, maybe before we have to come to an end for today, I mean, all this doesn't prevent us from talking about the importance of cross-border solidarity, right? And if it comes to the context again, in which we are working in, so international solidarity is really far from being a part of most vegan pressure groups or even animal rights and animal liberation activists today. And when it comes to solidarity with Palestine, it is in fact the case that more often than not, like active solidarity with Palestine is often openly opposed, or even called anti-Semitic. So what would be your message to these groups and people who argue like that?
So two things. Palestinian liberation is not anti-Semitic. What I believe when a country with such military power, with U.S. alliance, with like Western alliances, you just because the leadership is Jewish does not mean that you hate this country because of their leadership, because of the religion of their leadership. No, it's because of what they're doing, and you cannot compare like a Holocaust survivor or their descendants or a Jewish person with a nation state. So the Palestinian liberation movement is not fighting Jewish people. It's fighting a state. It's fighting an occupation. And I think conflating criticism of a country versus hatred for a people is that's what's anti-Semitic. I would say anti-Semitism as we know it has been a European invention, right? Like the Holocaust happened in Europe. It was the United States that turned away a ship of Jewish refugees seeking asylum and told them to go back to Israel. Palestinians were the ones who paid the price for it, and it's these countries who have manufactured and invented anti-Semitism as we know it today. And it's Palestinians who have to pay the price. And it's these countries that are lecturing Palestinians on anti-Semitism. I think it's I think it's a really cruel way to silence people. Norman Finkelstein, who is a descendant of Holocaust survivors, has said that his parents had always had resentment for Germans even after the Holocaust. He said that even though they knew that the Holocaust had ended and the people and the government can be separated, they still were never comfortable with Germans. And that is just a natural reaction to people who are facing violence by a specific people. So I answer that question two ways. One, a lot of like anti-Semitism, it's real. A lot of people have died due to anti-Semitism, but that's not why Palestinians want to be free.
So, speaking of international support and solidarity with your struggle and with Baladi in particular, what would you say is the best way to support your work and to support what you're doing? So, is it just to transfer money, or what is the thing that is most needed?
So for Baladi at least, and I will say Palestinians generally is we don't want money, right? We've seen the way in which money and donations on a large scale has led to kind of the nonprofit industrialization of Palestine, right? People don't want liberation; they just want human rights and to document. And these foreign workers and foreign salaries come into the country, and what has that effect been? And I think what we're seeing now is the way donations, and I mean donations are, I don't want to say like, yeah, don't donate to any Palestinian ever, but it's just like nonprofits are becoming obsolete, and we've definitely seen their limitations. We've seen their hypocrisy in terms of fighting or in terms of helping Palestinians. There have been reports of people calling the Red Cross in Gaza, and the Red Cross workers will say, we're actually on vacation right now. They'll say like, yes, my relatives have been killed, and they'll say we are on vacation. And the same countries that kind of fund like the US aid projects will build roads in Palestine, and then the roads get bombed with bombs purchased or like with US funds. So I would say definitely number one priority for Baladi and any Palestinian is to get involved in any Palestinian activism that you can, whether it's calling for a ceasefire, like talking to your politicians, talking to your neighbors, talking to anybody who can help and change public opinion about Palestine. And then there's also activists who I've seen in the UK and also in Japan who have put their bodies on the line in like Elbit systems. In Japan, there have been contracts that have been ended by people putting their bodies on the line as well. So anything on the spectrum that'll make the Palestinian cause prioritized is the best way.
And one more thing, just to have them mentioned, because we have gotten to know about their work in the context of the current aggression against Gaza. is Sulala in Gaza. I
Mhm.
think you mentioned them before, but we didn't mention their name.
Yeah.
They, of course, face in a situation that is even worse. Do you
Mhm.
know? I mean, probably you can't speak for Sulala at the moment, but we can ask you at least, do you know a way to support Sulala at the moment? I mean, the answer will be the same, probably regarding politics and getting involved into Palestine solidarity. But my impression is that they face a very serious situation. And have you heard something how their work is affected and how we can support them at the moment in the best way?
Yeah, so the best way to support Sulala actually, and um this is from what I know from following them is that animal food is not consistently being allowed to enter. It regularly runs out, and it's not just Sulala, but even people who have companion animals or independent rescuers or smaller organizations cannot feed their animals. And so allowing entry of animal food, and then also this is where the human rights is in, like, you can't separate it. It's inseparable from animal rights, because when you let in animal food and people are surviving off animal food in Gaza, I don't know, you can't guarantee that the animals are going to get the animal food and then the humans are not going to have any food, right? It's humans are probably going to feed themselves in this situation. Yes, some Sulala is feeding animals with the aid that gets let in. I don't doubt that animals uh will starve because Palestinians want them to starve, but it's because it's it's based on survival, and the way the consequences and the circumstances of these war have just put everybody in very difficult situations. So by allowing food and aid for humans into Gaza is just as important as allowing food and aid for animals into Gaza as well. So there is that, and they have a list of contacts and email templates and phone like voice templates on how to call and pressure different organizations and border personnel on letting in food and aid.
Okay, Neda, thank you so much for being with us today. And I think you made it pretty clear, and I think this is what we have to do. And we totally agree that our main task here is to get involved in solidarity movements with Palestine, but above all, to get involved with the fight against the Western countries' support for the Israeli occupation, which is the backbone of what we can do here, I think. And other than that, I still want to mention that we have published a call in solidarity with your work, which includes the possibility of actually spending some money. You made it very clear that this can never be instead of getting involved in politics, and we totally share that. But nevertheless, it might be a good thing if you guys that are listening to this podcast, if you want to spend some money, you can actually do it, and you can find the call for solidarity on our homepage and social media. Again, this was Neda Hussein from Palestine, working with the organization Baladi. Thank you so much for being with us here today, and I hope that we can get together in a future occasion.
I hope so too. Thank you.